Darren, good evening to you, and I hope you were able to get part of what Rwanda submitted at the Security Council. Your thoughts on what they say is an unprecedented security threat. Is that justified given what has now happened, and that is that their military forces have actually become part of what has happened in the DRC in the last few days?
Good evening. Yeah, Rwanda's comments here are very similar to what they've been saying for many years. And they have never really been substantiated to any real means. The FDLR, for example, yes, it certainly is made up, or originally, former Interahamwe. But the force itself these days is much diminished. And certainly no serious analyst considers it a remaining threat to Rwanda, let alone to Rwanda's ongoing existence as a state. This is really, I think, a convenient excuse. In many ways, it reminds me of the arguments Russia was making with regards to eastern Ukraine. And I think the world has gotten a little bit tired of these answers, which is why I think country after country after country at this year SE meeting, we're all pointing the finger at Rwanda as being the main factor here behind the escalation. Now, that doesn't mean that the DRC government is faultless or completely, blameless either. Certainly, they have at times allied with the FDLR. They have their own issues with their capacity. They've clearly been unable themselves to bring security to this area of decent DRC. And of course, as with Rwanda, both sides have at times been willing to break away from any negotiations and talks if they feel that there's an advantage to be gained. So this is really an issue where both sides are quite problematic. But Rwanda's claims of being wholly an innocent party and aggrieved party is certainly not something that's under scrutiny.
Yeah.
We have much evidence from UN reports over the years of much direct Rwandan support for M23, including many times the presence of Rwandan forces and Rwandan equipment such as surface-to-air missiles on DRC territory.
Yeah.
To this point, we don't yet have any evidence of any Congolese forces on Rwandan territory. So it's really one-sided over here.
It is a very complex situation when you listen to it, Darren, particularly as it regards the regional players, because there's Burundi also in this equation. But I want to focus the attention on Monusco, because this is where we, South Africa, get affected as a country, because our soldiers are part of this Monusco force, which is a United Nations peacekeeping mission. And you've heard Rwanda say that they've been there since they were called MONUSCO at the time. This was back in 1999. And the very presence of a peacekeeping mission, I think it is self-explanatory, Darren. Why is that a problem that a peacekeeping mission would also protect civilians? I thought that is what their mission is there to do, but Rwanda seems to argue that the protection of civilians, the DRC people, by MONUSCO is tantamount to the talk by the Rwandan, or rather the DRC president, of a quote-unquote regime change agenda. Do you understand that?
No, exactly. I mean, over the years, this is part and parcel of much propaganda against MONUSCO that Rwanda has been pushing over the years. They're taking legitimate concerns around what impact MONUSCO has had over the 30 years it's been in the area. And certainly it hasn't been able to fully resolve the violent issues, and using that in a very different direction, trying to then point to MONUSCO as being a bad party or non-neutral party, which I think is completely incorrect. Obviously, MONUSCO's main mandate is to protect civilians. It is to neutralize armed groups where possible. And of course, we need to remember that as many concerns as we have with the government of the DRC, they are elected through a democratic process. They are the legitimate government of the area. Therefore, it makes sense for MONUSCO to at least work alongside their military when it comes to doing things like protecting cities like Goma. So again, this is really an issue where I think the Rwandans were trying to use a bit of sophistry in their argument, and not really able to make a coherent argument as for why MONUSCO should leave, or at least why it's subject to attack. Let's not forget that M23 has attacked MONUSCO forces resulting in at least a few deaths of peacekeepers, including 2 from South Africa, at least.
Yeah.
I think another factor, of course, is that what the UN brings to the area is a level of awareness and monitoring. And that is also quite inconvenient, especially considering that M23, in many areas of controls, is accused of stealing resources, of redirecting things like coltan minerals from the DRC into Rwanda. So the fewer eyes that are available from independent parties like the UN, I think the more convenient it is for Rwanda and M23.
Final question to you. What should South Africa's position be? Because I think in what has happened in the last few skirmishes that occurred there, we have suffered the biggest loss. If you look back, I think it was October when yet more skirmishes occurred last year. Again, it was South African soldiers at the receiving end. And the understanding is that we are not well equipped with military hardware. What should President Ramaphosa be doing in this instance?
So I think there's 2 factors here. The first one is that South African troops in general are always willing to go on the offensive. This is something I've heard again and again and again. And for example, I'm told that with Monusco, its own response, one of the first units to respond was the South African Quick Reaction Force. So part of this is because South Africans have been heavily involved from the start. Beyond that, yes, there are issues around the force not having, and that's not just the South African group, but also the entirety of SAMI DRC, not having enough additional equipment when it comes to be able to provide force multiplying effects. So things like, for example, attack helicopters, things like drones, things like transport helicopters, things like heavier mortars and artillery, things, all these things that allow really an infantry force to be a lot more effective over a bigger area. So what I'd expect to see from Ramaphosa is, first of all, obviously much pressure on the diplomatic side, because the way to solve this is through diplomacy. But in terms of ensuring that the troops on the ground are the best supported they can be, given that they can't rapidly leave at the moment, is to try to get to them those kinds of capabilities that will give them an edge. As many aircraft as we can get airworthy and available, as many additional armored vehicles if possible.